This is going to be a very interesting video. So I have had some technical difficulties. By technical, it actually has nothing to do with my technology. It's mostly just, it's mostly just my own body deciding to betray me yet again for like the second week in a row. I've been battling a set of sinus headaches since about Thursday afternoon. I went to work all day yesterday with a massive sinus headache, and it was killing me. Came home, like, here's kind of the schedule of how things went in the last 36 hours. I came home, I got home about 5 o'clock, and in the evening, Friday, first thing I did was crash out in a very dark room with as little light as possible, with something over my eyes and my forehead to apply as much pressure and as much heat as I possibly could stand because it hurt just so damn bad. I ended up waking up about 2 hours later just so I could talk with my son on FaceTime. That's something I do when he's not with me because, otherwise I wouldn't get a chance to see him. And then I crashed out again, and I didn't wake up until about 7 o'clock this morning. Rolled out of bed in pain. I mean, pain wasn't as bad, but it was starting to come back in a big way. And then, thankfully, one of my family members decided to drop off some Sudafed and Tylenol for me this afternoon, and that has been a major blessing because it has helped tremendously. Now the pain is mostly, instead of being right all the way up here and down in the bridge of my nose, it felt like having a hangover, and I haven't had alcohol in 3 months, so you can understand how painful that is. But the pain was also in my head, just a little bit right over here. It's still kind of there throbbing in the background, but it's not as bad as it was this morning or earlier today. So the goal of this week's this month's live stream is talking about my writing process and what I'm doing right now. Things have been kind of hit and miss. Last month I announced the title of book 5, The Mantle of the Fatherless. I have not announced the cover art yet. That'll be coming once I start getting the feedback from beta readers. But I've been getting some good feedback so far. One beta reader is almost done reading through the book, which is great. Others are still taking their time, which is fine. The goal is to have it out hopefully by the summer, but as I've said, I'm open to being flexible. My goal is at the very latest having it out by Christmas. That having been said, I have posted some new stuff on Instagram and Twitter, new content for book 5. Specifically, I've posted some banners for some of the Ronsonian noble houses that are going to be introduced in the series. So one of the things that this book is doing that is different from the first 4 books in the series is that this book is taking, well, I take that back. Book 4 did take place, the majority of it, outside of Isinkran, which is the 5 kingdoms. It took place on an island province called Farfell, and it was still titled in with the rest of the series because this one story encapsulates some history that affects what was happening in the 5 kingdoms previously. And so it was important to tell that story. This story, so part of it is it picks up 20 years down the line. It's a new generation of characters. Some of them are related to characters from the first 4 books. I'm not going to say who, I'm not going to say how, because I want readers to discover that for themselves. But one of the things I want to do is I really want to explore other parts of the world that have only been talked about in previous books. One of those countries is Ronso, which is across this sea, this Western Ocean that sits west of Isinkran. And so, from a historical perspective, Ronso is actually very important to the Five Kingdoms because the first human beings came to what became the Five Kingdoms from Ronso. So some Ronsonians were exploring. They came across the ocean to what became the Five Kingdoms, and they settled there, and they began spreading out. And eventually, the different noble house clan ties began to deteriorate and disseminate, and eventually, you have just people who become Isinkranians, especially after the Mennonian Wars and all the history that leads into that. I thought it was important to really get a chance to explore this, and so the Ronsonian kingdom is the culture behind it. And I've mentioned this in interviews and that I've done for podcasts and other channels. And this is the first time I'm really kind of talking about it on my channel. Is that the Ronsonian culture is very unique. So from a linguistic perspective, because I always base my languages off of real languages that exist today. So like the elf language is based off of French and Italian, the dwarf language off of German, which seems to be a natural thing. The vampires, Castilian Spanish was a natural direction because of the fangs. The different languages have different meanings or different significances. So with Ronsonian culture, I wanted to do something really cool. So I began blending Greek and feudal Japanese aesthetics, and I started using both of those languages as the core language, or as the core basis for what Ronsonian is. So there's a lot of pronunciations that come out of Japanese. There's some pronunciations that come out of first century Koine Greek and modern Greek that I thought would be really fun to incorporate. And so what I'll end up doing linguistically is I will take a phrase that I want to use, I will translate it into Japanese, write out that Japanese translation, and then I will translate it again into Greek, and then I'll start picking and choosing which letter combinations I want to use, accent marks. But I keep it as consistent as I possibly can with things that have already been incorporated in previous books, because in book 2 you are in, there is a group of Ronsonian characters that are introduced, namely the crew of the Dragon's Serenity, and the bulk of their slang and their dialect is taken from Ronsonian, so they'll have Ronsonian epithets and swear words and stuff like that. And I did something very similar in book 4, because Callum, who is a crew member on board the Dragon Serenity, becomes the central protagonist of book 4, and his culture is very different from what he experiences on Farfell, and I wanted his language to be something that creates issues. And again, that the language comes up again with one of the characters in book 5, because he is Ronsonian. But I wanted to incorporate it. I wanted to expand on that. I didn't just want these random characters who are Ronsonian existing outside of their home country. So what I did as part of the plot for book 5 is I have one of my main characters, one of my protagonists. She is instructed to go to Ronso in search of someone important to her. And she does travel to Ronso, and so we get to see this fresh look at this sovereign empire. And it's this really, it was really neat to kind of develop this particular structure. I looked at Greek architecture. I looked at Roman architect. I'm not sorry, not Roman architecture. Although Romans did, take on some of the same styles that the Greeks used to use, but Japanese architecture. So there's a lot of blending of those architectural styles in Ronso. Their main city, their capital city of Rouen, is I kind of took inspiration from Tokyo, and how Tokyo is this very modern metropolis, even though it has such ancient roots in the Edo period. I mean, now it's just a city of glass and light, and so while Ronso is still very much a medieval land, just like the Five Kingdoms are, one of the things I want to incorporate is I want to incorporate a different structural aesthetic. So there are buildings in Rouen that are not your typical stone and wood structures. They're made with stone, yes, but they also incorporate glass, lots of glass, because there are volcanoes and thermal hot springs spread all across the country. And so it's easy for them to develop refined glass. I also wanted to incorporate a lot of the tiered pagoda style architecture mixed with the long colonnades that you would see. So again, blending that fusion between Japanese architecture and Greek architecture. But the aesthetic doesn't just stop with the language and with the aesthetic. It also it's incorporated in the way, like the clothing and the costumes and the armor and the swords and how they operate. But the other thing that I want to incorporate is that the religion is also a big deal. They have two different types of religion in Ronso. There's the oldest is kind of a Shintoist animistic form of religion, and that's one of the. And at the time at the book 5 takes place, it is the dominant religion. The previously dominant religion was focused on the worship of dragons, and that religion kind of fell through. It became the less dominant, or it became the secondary religion, mainly because the dragons are more or less endangered species in my series. Menenius, the title villain of book 1, you only get introduced to him in person, in physical form, in the prologue of book 1. But Menenius, his armies tried to wipe out all the dragons across Ronso and the Five Kingdoms, or what became the Five Kingdoms. And so the goal was to eradicate all of them. And he didn't succeed. There are still several dragons out and about who exist. The elder dragons that are introduced in book 2 are there. And the dragon that is partnered with Gavin in book 1 is there. But because the temple that protected the dragon nests was ransacked by Menenius' forces, it proved that their faith was misplaced in the dragons, that the dragons were just as mortal and not godlike. And so it's that idea of, if you can see a god bleed, it really can't be a god. And so that misplaced faith gets deteriorated very quickly, and so the Ronsonian worship returns back to the animism, and it returns back to the more totemic. There's a spirit inside of every living organism type religion that was often seen in Shintoism, which is a Japanese religious structure. Shinto is less dominant these days than Buddhism is. Buddhism definitely took a stronger pull on the Japanese, but you see both being explored. You do see people who are familiar with the traditions and the habits, and so they will they kind of include both of them simultaneously. There's kind of a syncretism to them. And you see the same thing in China with Taoism and Confucianism, if I could say words properly. Just the same as you see, in India. There's a blend of Buddhism and Hinduism and Sikhism, and so it's just dependent on where those religions play a factor. So Ronso was definitely something I wanted to explore in person and physically, showing this beautiful landscape. And one of the neat features of the Ronsonian geography is that the land is broken up into provinces, so it's one entire country. But unlike the five kingdoms, where each kingdom has its own government structure and everything, and they operate kind of like the EU. The Ronsonian political structure it's imperial. So there is an emperor. The emperor comes from a ruling house. That house they hold the dynasty currently, and there are several other noble houses that operate out of the different provinces. And some of the provinces only have one noble house, and it's dependent on what's going on there. But those that have more than one, there is a dominant or a governing house, or there is a non-governing house. It's just simply dependent on which one. So, for example, Rinna Hal, who is the captain of the Dragon Serenity in Book 2, her family is in. We get to expand a little bit on her family, and her father. His name is Theron Hal the First. That'll be important for Book 5. He is the head of House Hal, and I actually posted the banner for that. For that house I think earlier this week. It's a kind of a teal seafoam field with bubbles on it and a white shark in the center of it. And their house words are the sea is freedom. And the reason for that is because their house, Juko Hal, their ancestral home, sits right on a river that feeds out into the ocean. So they're fishermen, they're seafaring people. And so while Rinna is the only child of her father, she likes being out at sea. She enjoys being on the open ocean. Sailing is as much a part of her blood as being a noblewoman. But she's really not a noblewoman because she doesn't have the same mindset for political gain like some of the others. But her family is not the dominant or the governing house of their province. Their province is Amedasos province, so they're not the dominant house. And I think that's kind of interesting, that while they're a lesser house, they're not any less noble. And in fact, she's actually a very honorable character when you get to know her a little bit better. She's got her hangups because she's a person. She's a human being. She's got her faults and her frailties, and she's a human being. But I think she was a fun character to write and to continue to explore into Book 5. But the other parts of the geography that I thought, like the river, for example, that Amedasos sits on, where Juko is right there on the river's edge. That river, the Lucona, actually starts off at the northern end of an island province that sits across the river from Amedasos, and this province is called Trasgunji. Another province that I've started exploring with banner posts and stuff like that on Instagram and Twitter. But the north end, the headwaters of the river, they actually flow around this island province, and there's a series of gateways, of locks that boats have to stop at, have their papers checked, and they can continue on to the next one. In fact, there's a red wall, and if ships are seen not going to the northern end of that wall and going into the headwaters of the river, they're considered an automatic enemy and will be shot down with arrows, catapults, and trebuchets. But coming into where the capital city Rouen is, it's this huge, massive circular bay, and in the center of it is this lighthouse that provides light out to the entire proximity of the harbor. And there are different anchor points throughout the harbor, specifically at the harbor in Rouen, which is in the northwestern corner. It's kind of hard to say corner because it's a circular bay, but it's the northwestern segment or quadrant of this of the circular bay, and that's where Rouen is. And then there's other points along the bay, and then it feeds out on the southern end of Trasgunji province, back out. It passes by Amedasos, and then it passes out through the southern end of this red wall, and that's how people. So it creates a flow of traffic coming into and out of the country, and there's no other way in or out of the country. I thought that was a really fun idea to get across. On top of that, each of the houses is known for, the political alliances are really kind of fun, and that's one of the things I play with in this particular book. For example, the dragon worshippers, they're really militant, especially after what happened with Menenius, and so anything connected to Menenius, anybody who shows up at their temple who's an outsider, who's not Ronsonian, they get really iffy about it. They get really defensive, and so that's going to play a factor into this book. And then it's been fun to just be exploring this. One of the other things that I've done, though, is I've been putting together little videos of because I do three-dimensional renderings of my characters on Hero Forge. Hero Forge has been really great for that. I don't draw very well. I mean, I draw well enough, but I wouldn't. Let's just say I struggle with the same kind of problems that Rob Liefeld does, and that I don't know how to draw feet. But because I wanted to have the characters look as realistic as possible, and I struggle with making realistic looking characters, I stumbled upon Hero Forge and became really helpful for me. Really helpful because I was able to generate these characters and put them together and make them look like what I was envisioning in my head. And I really appreciate that. And so what I've done is on my website, if you go into if you go to my website, which is archivesofthe5kingdoms.com, and there's the archives tab, you can find character profiles, and the character profiles use full color renderings of these and screenshots of these characters. All the characters from books 1 through 4 are already there. I haven't posted anything from book 5 yet because I haven't begun promoting it fully. But I have been throwing out these characters, and I've done 2 so far. One, this is my female lead character. Her name is Eíya, and Eíya is probably the central protagonist. Most of the story focuses on her, and I, I, this one of the things I wanted to do with book 5 is I wanted there to be echoes of book 1. So I made a point of writing three main protagonists, just like I did for book 1. 2 male protagonists and 1 female protagonist. But instead, whereas book 1, Amara, who is the female protagonist in book 1, she doesn't get as much screen time as some of the other characters, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to flip that. So in order to, I still wanted to have that similar structure. I wanted to have echoes of book 1, but have it just be have it be different. Not exactly like a requel or a reboot or anything like that. I wanted there to. I'm a big fan of structure. Structure is important to me. So like when I did my master's degree in biblical studies, one of the things I was really appreciative of, and most people look at the Bible and they say, oh, well, it's old, it's boring, and. Actually, when you look at the structure of the Bible, there is a structure there. Every book has a specific structure. Every author of the Bible has a specific design in mind when they play it out with their writing. In fact, I mean, case in point, the Gospel of Matthew, there's 5 main blocks of Jesus's teachings. Those 5 blocks are meant to echo the 5 books of the Torah or the Pentateuch. So the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So I like the idea of structure and being very specific and being very deliberate in the design of my stories. And I put things in there that I think are important, not just to be callbacks, not for the sake of nostalgia or to put that out there. I specifically will post, or not post, but put things into play because I want there to be a deliberate echo of how of something that happened in the past, because history is cyclical. History does have a tendency of repeating itself, especially when we refuse to learn from the mistakes of the past. And not to get too into current events, but we can see what happens when we allow bad things to happen. Let's just leave it at that. So I wanted there to be these echoes of book 1. I was very deliberate in how I structured book 5, so that 3 main protagonists, 1 being female, but instead of having the 2 guys be the center focus, I wanted Eíya, who is my central female protagonist, I want her to be front and center. Because I'm a big fan of balance, and I wanted to balance that out. She's a fun character to write. I won't go into a whole lot of details about her just yet, but she is a very headstrong young woman. She has these ideas for what she wants to do, what she wants to accomplish. Sometimes she doesn't think them through all the way, and it leads to some conflict. But at the same time, she has this heart of gold, and she wants to do what's right. She has a very solid conscience, and it took a lot of research to write her in a way that I think makes her authentic, without playing into stereotypes. She's not your typical. She's not a damsel in distress by any means, but there are times where she finds herself in and over her head in certain situations because she didn't account for the realism of the world. And so, but she is very capable of doing it. She deals with her own, just like with any character, she deals with her own hangups. She deals with some predilections that she has. She's not puritanical by any means. I'll let your imaginations determine what I mean by that. You'll get to see more of it in the book, but she is a very interesting character, and I hate to say that she's a strong female character because I think that's kind of a cop-out. She's a strong character, not because she's female, but because the experiences and life choices that she makes help her become a strong character. Being female is just part of that experience. It's just part of that upbringing. And there's a lot that she has to live up to. In part to her mother's legacy, in part to her father's legacy. And she was actually a lot of fun to write. And what was really good is it prompted some conversations with my mother to kind of get some ideas for the character. So it prompted these conversations because I needed to get some research, and who better than to get a first-person account for what I want to work into Eíya's characterization. The insight that my mom provided was invaluable, and I cannot thank her enough. She's probably never going to watch this because it's YouTube, and she typically doesn't watch my YouTube videos, but her insight for this part of Eíya's character and characterization and her development and the character arc that she's going to go through in book 5, it was absolutely invaluable. So, Mom, if you are watching this, thank you. Another character that I've introduced on Instagram and Twitter is Hageldeen. Hadreldín is a very, very conflicted character. And the reason for his conflict is because he's living up to a father he's never known. He is dealing with a past that is coming back to haunt him. And he kind of goes through a theodicy. So just like Asher went through a theodicy in book 1 and to some extent in book 3, there is a kind of reference there with Hageldeen. Hageldeen's theodicy is going to be a little bit different. Not a little bit. It's going to be a lot different. It is tied to his father, who died in book 3. I'm not going to say who his father is. I'll let readers make that connection on their own. But Hageldeen, he encounters a unique set of skills and abilities that he didn't account for, things that he wasn't anticipating. And so because of that, he develops this resistance to the abilities. Whereas Asher kind of wanted to embrace them and work with them, Hageldeen's abilities terrify him. And he's already a character that is at odds with the people that he's raised among. He's an elf, but he's a very specific type of elf, and he thinks he's one particular subspecies or subset of elf, and it turns out he's something else entirely different. And the fact that he is left unaware of that for the majority of the book kind of sets the trajectory for his character arc and for the things that he's going to deal with. His story is a bit more heartbreaking than some of the other characters that readers are going to encounter, just because the pain that he's already dealing with his father having been dead for his entire life. but at the same time, he makes for a very captivating and he's a very intriguing character. I thought I was going to struggle with writing the character a little bit more, and honestly I didn't. The character that I struggled with writing the most is another protagonist that I'll talk about after I've introduced him. But yeah, Hadreldín was a fun character to write for, just simply because his particular character arc mirrors Asher's so closely. And Asher was a character that I really enjoyed writing for. Just because there's so much of myself in Asher. The theodicy factor, the trying to determine whether or not, faith, how important faith is to a person, and how destiny can call on someone in ways that they don't expect. Anyway, I'm getting ready to wrap up my live stream. I've been trying to keep them shorter and to the point, and less, because it's just me. I could probably continue riffing, but I'm tired. I'm still dealing with a headache. So hopefully you guys will permit me the opportunity to go to bed a little bit early. Anyway, so for those of you watching, please make sure to like, please make sure to subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications so that you can get alerts whenever new videos come out. New videos do come out every Saturday, with a few exceptions, but every Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, new content. Next week, I will have a new top 10 reading recommendations list. That will be provided by UK romance author Amy C. Beckinsale. She's already on Instagram posting her top 10 lists as part of her stories, part of her reels. Gave her permission to do that because I'm really looking forward to seeing how that promotion goes with the video. But you can follow her at Amy C. Beckinsale on Instagram. She's really fun, great sense of humor. I had her on the show to do Author Awareness August a couple years ago. She is an absolute fun person to connect with. So she'll be my guest host next week for the top 10 reading recommendations. I have a great new interview coming up in March for Author Awareness. I have the next steps in the hero's journey for Creator's Corner, and of course, another live stream in 4 weeks. In fact, a month from today. So, that having been said, you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and keep writing.